We got music, we got it all. Got it all. We've got 4 minutes to go. To go. T-minus 3 minutes. Not bringing these an interesting place to be. There we go. 2 minutes to go. Hope everyone's doing well. We're just doing a little. We'll wait until it's the scheduled time. I need to figure out a better setup. The problem is that there are several people from Europe who are in the little group with myself and Toasty on Gothic, and it would be nice to have them be able to show up as well. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to do at least one earlier stream. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously to do the Saturday morning papers, but that's a very specific kind of thing. So I'm gonna have to figure something else out. Yeah. Yeah, we'll see what's going on. So let's just say the schedule is still in a little bit of flux. How exactly it'll fall out, has yet to be determined. But as neither here nor there. Today, we'll wait one more minute as we see if anyone else wants to shimmy on over and listen to The Hobbit. I should actually take a look at how long this chapter is. Let's see, we're in chapter 8. So 9 is on 226 and 8 is on 188. So be 10, 12 gets to 200, and so 36 pages. Okay. Or 38 pages. Sorry. I can do math. I can do math. So, we'll see how my voice is doing after we go through this chapter. We'll kind of play it by ear from there. Maybe we'll transition to some games if my voice is hurting. If not, maybe we'll look at another short story or something. I'd like to dig into some of that King in Yellow. Maybe do a Lovecraft story or something. I think some of them are a little shorter. Anyway. Okie dokie. Let's put this. That was a bad idea. All right, let's do this. All right, I'm just gonna scooch a little closer to that. It's bigger actually on here than it is on my screen, so I'm just kind of scooching a little closer to make sure I can see it. So, yeah. Hopefully the audio doesn't get mucked up a little. All right. There's that. Let me just have this up over here so I can see what is going on. Excellent. All right. Well, it is 1 minute past, so we might as well move along. Okay. Chapter 8: Flies and Spiders. They walked in a single file. The entrance to the path was like a sort of arch leading into a gloomy tunnel made by two great trees that leant together, too old and strangled with ivy and hung with lichen, to bear more than a few blackened leaves. The path itself was narrow and wound in and out among the trunks. Soon the light at the gate was a bright little hole far behind, and the quiet was so deep that their feet seemed to thump along all the trees leaned over them and listened. As their eyes became used to the dimness, they could see a little way either side in a sort of darkened green glimmer, occasionally a slender beam of sun that had the luck to slip through some opening in the leaves far above, and still more luck to not be caught in the tangled boughs and matted twigs beneath, stabbed down thin and bright before them. But this was seldom, and it soon ceased altogether. It actually sounds really beautiful. There were black squirrels in the wood. As Bilbo's sharp, inquisitive eyes got used to seeing things, he could catch a glimpse of them, whisking off the path and scuttling behind the tree trunks. There were queer noises, too, grunts, scufflings, and hurryings in the undergrowth, and amongst the leaves that lay piled endlessly thick in places on the forest floor. But what made the noises he could not see. The nastiest things they saw were the cobwebs. Dark, dense cobwebs with threads extraordinarily thick, often stretched from tree to tree or tangled in the lower branches on either side of them. There were none stretched across the path. Those spiders, they keep away from the math anyway. There were none stretched across the path, but whether it was because of some magic kept it clear or for whatever other reason, they could not guess. It was not long before they grew to hate the forest as heartily as they had hated the tunnels of the goblins, and it seemed to offer even less hope of any ending. But they had to go on and on, long after they were sick for a sight of the sun in the sky and longed for the feel of wind in their faces. There was no movement of air under the forest roof. It was everlastingly still and dark and stuffy. Even the dwarves felt it, who were used to tunneling and lived for long times without seeing the light of the sun. But the hobbit, who liked holes to make a house but not to spend summer days in, felt that he was being slowly suffocated. The nights were the worst. It then became pitch dark. Not what you call pitch dark, but really pitch. So black you really could see nothing. Bilbo tried flapping his hand in front of his nose, but he could not see it at all. Well, perhaps that was not true to say they could see nothing. They could see eyes. They slept all closely huddled together and took turns to watch. But when it was Bilbo's turn, he would see the gleams in the darkness around them, and sometimes pairs of yellow or red or green eyes would stare at them from a little distance and then slowly fade and disappear and slowly shine out again from another place. And sometimes they would gleam down from the branches just above him, and that was the most terrifying. But the eyes that he liked the least were the horrible, pale, bulbous sort of eyes. Insect eyes, he thought, not animal eyes, only they're much too big. Although it was not yet very cold, they tried lighting watchfires at night, but they soon gave that up. It seemed to bring hundreds and hundreds of eyes all around them, though the creatures, whatever they were careful never to let their bodies show in the little flicker of the flames. Worse still, it brought thousands of dark gray and black moths, some nearly as big as your hand, flapping and whirring about their ears. They could not stand that, nor the huge bats, black as a top hat either. So they gave up on fires and sat at night and dozed in the enormous, uncanny darkness. All this went on for what seemed to the hobbit ages upon ages, and he was always hungry, for they were extremely careful with their provisions. Even so, as the days followed days and still the forest seemed just the same, they began to get anxious. The food would not last forever. It was, in fact, already beginning to get low. They tried shooting at the squirrels, and they wasted many arrows before they managed to bring one down on the path, but when they roasted it, it proved horrible to the taste, and they shot no more squirrels. They were thirsty, too, for they had none too much water, and all the same, they had seen neither spring nor stream. This was their state when one day they found their path blocked by a running water. It flowed fast and strong, but not very wide right across the way, and it was black, or looked so in the gloom. It was well that Bjorn had warned them against it, or they would have drunk from it, whatever its color, and filled their empty skins at its bank, as they only thought of how to cross it without wetting themselves in the water. There had been a bridge of wood across, but it had rotted and fallen, leaving only the broken posts near the bank. Bilbo, kneeling on the brink and peering forward, cried, "There's a boat against the far bank, and why couldn't it have been on this side?" "How far do you think it is?" asked Thorin, for by now they knew Bilbo had the sharpest eyes among them. "Not far. I shouldn't think above 12 yards. 12 yards? Should have thought it was 30 at least, but my eyes don't see as well as they used to 100 years ago. Still, 12 yards is as good as a mile. We can't jump, and we daren't try to wade or swim." "Can any of you throw a rope?" "What's the good of that? The boat is sure to be tied up, even if we hook it, which I doubt." "I don't believe it's tied," said Bilbo, "although, of course, I can't be sure in the light, but it looks to me as if it's just drawn up on the bank, which is low just there where the path goes down to the water." "Dory is the strongest, but Philly is the youngest and has the best sight. Come here, Philly. Let's see if you can see the boat Mr. Baggins is talking about." Philly thought he could, so when he stared a long while to get an idea of the direction, the others brought him a rope. They had several with them, and in the end, the longest they fashioned with the large iron hooks they'd used for catching their packs and their straps about their shoulders. Philly took it in his hand, balanced it for a moment, and then flung it across the stream. Splash! It fell in the water. "Not far enough," said Bilbo, who was peering forward. A couple of feet and you would have dropped it into the boat. Try again. I don't suppose the magic is strong enough to hurt you if you touch a bit of wet rope." Philly picked up the hook when he had drawn it back, rather doubtfully all the same. This time he threw it with great strength. "Steady, you've thrown it right into the woods on the other side now. Draw it back gently." Philly hauled on the rope back slowly, and after a while, Bilbo said, "Carefully, it's lying in the boat. Let's hope the hook will catch." It did. The rope went taut, and Philly pulled in vain. Um, Killy came to his help, and then Oin and Gloin, they tugged, and suddenly they all fell over on their backs. Bilbo was on the lookout, however, caught the rope with a piece of stick, and with a piece of stick fended off the little black boat as it came rushing across the stream. He shouted, and Balin was just in time to seize the boat before it floated off down the current. "It was tied after all," said he, looking at the snapped painter that was still dangling from it. "That was a good pull, my lads, and a good job that our rope was stronger." "Who'll cross first?" asked Bilbo. "I shall," said Thorin, "and you will come with me, Philly and Balin. That's as many as the boat will hold at a time. After that, Killy, Oin, and Gloin, and Dory. Next, Ori, Nori, Beef, or Bombor, and last, Dwalin and Bombor." "I'm always last, and I don't like it," said Bombor. "It's someone else's turn today. You should not be so fat. As you are, you must be the last and the lightest boatload. Don't start grumbling against orders, or something bad will happen to you." "There aren't any oars. How are you going to get the boat back to the far bank?" asked the hobbit. "Give me another length of rope and another hook," said Philly. When they got it ready, he cast it out into the darkness ahead and as high as he could throw it. Since it did not fall down again, they saw it must have stuck in the branches. "Get in now," said Philly, "and one of you haul on the rope that is stuck on the tree on the other side. One of the others must keep hold of the hook. I'm sorry. One of the others must keep hold of the hook we used first, and when we are safe on the other side, he can hook it on and you can draw the boat back." In this way, they were all soon on the far bank, safe across the enchanted stream. Dwalin had just scrambled out with a coiled rope in his arm, and Bombor, still grumbling, was getting ready to follow when something bad did happen. There was a flying sound of hooves on the path ahead, and out of the gloom came suddenly the shape of a flying deer. It charged the dwarves and bowled them over, then gathered itself for a leap. High it sprang and cleared the water with a mighty jump, but did not reach the other side safely. Thorin was the only one who had kept his wits, and as soon as it landed, he bent his bow and fitted an arrow in case any hidden guardian of the boat appeared. Now he sent a swift, sure shot into the leaping beast. As it reached the far bank, it stumbled. The shadow swallowed it up. But they had heard the sound of the hooves quickly falter and go still. Before they could shout any praise of the shot, however, a dreadful wail from Bilbo put all thoughts of venison out of their mind. "Bombor has fallen in! Bombor is drowning!" he cried. It was only too true. Bombor had only 1 foot in the land when the heart bore down on him and sprang over him. He had stumbled, thrusting the boat away from the bank, and then toppled back into the dark water, his hands slipping off the slimy roots in the edge, while the boat span slowly off and disappeared. They could still see his hood above the water, and when they ran to the bank, quickly they flung a rope with a hook towards him. His hand caught it, and they pulled him to shore. He was drenched from hair to boots, of course, but that was not the worst. When they laid him on the bank, he was already fast asleep, with one hand clutching the rope so tight that they could not get it from his grasp. And fast asleep he remained in spite of all they could do. They were still standing over him, cursing their ill luck and Bombor's clumsiness, and lamenting the loss of the boat, which made it impossible to go back and look for the heart, when they became aware of dim blowing horns in the woods, and the sounds of dogs baying far off. Then they all fell silent. As they sat, it seemed they could hear the noise of a great hunt going by to the north of the path. They saw no sign of it. There they sat for a long while and did not dare make a move. Bombor slept on with a smile on his fat face, as if he no longer cared for all the troubles that vexed them. Suddenly, on the path ahead appeared some white deer, a hind, and fawns with as snowy white as the heart had been dark. They glimmered in the shadow. Before Thorin could cry out, 3 of the dwarves had leapt to their feet and loosed arrows from their bows. None seemed to find their mark. The deer turned and vanished in the trees, silently as they had come, and in vain the dwarves shot their arrows after them. "Stop! Stop!" shouted Thorin. But it was too late. The excited dwarves had wasted the last of their arrows, and now the bows Bjorn had given them were useless. They were a gloomy party that night, and the gloom gathered still darker on them in the following days. They had crossed the enchanted stream, but beyond it, the path seemed to straggle on just as before, and in the forest they could see no change. Yet, if they had known more about it and considered the meaning of the hunt and the white deer that had appeared on their path, they would have known they were at least drawing towards the eastern edge and uh, would have come if they could have kept their courage and their hope to thinner trees and places where the sunlight came again. But they did not know this, and they were burdened with a heavy body of bombor, which they had to carry along with them as best they could, taking the wearisome task in turns with four each while others shared their packs. If these had not become too late in the last few days, they would never have managed, but a slumbering and smiling bombor was a poor exchange for packs filled with food, however heavy. In a few days' time, came when there was practically nothing left to eat or drink. Nothing wholesome could be seen growing in the woods, only funguses and herbs with pale leaves and an unpleasant smell. About 4 days from the enchanted stream, they came to a part where most of the trees were beeches. They were at first inclined to be cheered by the change, for here there was no undergrowth and the shadows were not as deep. There was a greenish light above them, and in places they could see the distance to either side of the path, yet the light only showed the endless lines of straight gray trunks like pillars of some huge twilight hall. There was a breath of air and the noise of wind, but it had a sad sound. A few leaves came rustling down to remind them that outside autumn was coming on. Their feet ruffled amongst the dead leaves of countless other autumns that had drifted over the banks of the path from the deep red carpets of the forest. Still, Bombor slept, and they grew very weary. At times they heard disquieting laughter. Sometimes there was singing in the distance too. The laughter was the laughter of the fair voices, not of fair voices, not of goblins. And the singing was beautiful, but it sounded eerie and strange, and they were not comforted. Rather, they hurried on from these parts with what strength they had left. 2 days later, they found their paths going downwards. Before long, they were at a valley filled almost entirely with a mighty growth of oaks. "Is there no end to this accursed forest?" said Thorn. "Somebody must climb a tree and see if he can get his head above the roof and have a look around. This is the only way is to choose the tallest tree that overhangs the path." Of course, somebody meant Bilbo. They chose him because to be of any use, the climber must get his head above the topmost leaves, and so he must be light enough for the highest and slenderest branches to bear him. Poor Mr. Baggins had never had much practice in climbing trees, but they hoisted him up in the lowest branches of an enormous oak that grew right out into the path, and up he had to go as best he could. He pushed his way through the tangled twigs with many a slap in the eye, and he was greened and grimed from the old bark of the greater boughs. More than once he slipped and caught himself just in time, and at last, after a dreadful struggle on a difficult place where there seemed to be no convenient branches at all, he got near the top. At the same time, he was wondering whether there were spiders in the tree and how he was going to get down, except by falling. In the end, he poked his head above the roof of the leaves, and when he found spiders all right, but they were only small ones of ordinary size, and they were after the butterflies. Bilbo's eyes were nearly blinded by the light. He could hear the dwarves shouting at him from below, but he could not answer, only hold on and blink. The sun was shining brilliantly, and it was a long while before he could bear it. When he could, he saw all around him a sea of dark green, ruffled here and there by breezes, and there were everywhere hundreds of butterflies. I expect they were the kind of purple emperor, a butterfly that loves the tops of oak woods. But these were not purple at all. They were dark, velvety black, without any markings to be seen. He looked at the black emperors for a long time and enjoyed the feel of the breeze in his hair and his face. But at length the cries of the dwarves, who were now simply stamping with impatience down below, reminded him of his real business. It was no good. Gaze as he might, he could see no end to the trees and the leaves in any direction. His heart, that had been lightened by the sight of the sun and the feel of the wind, sank below his toes. There was no food to go back to down below. Actually, as I've told you, they were not far off from the edge of the forest. And if Bilbo had the sense to see it, the tree he had climbed, although it was tall in itself, was standing near the bottom of a wide valley, so that from its top, the trees seemed to swell around the edges of the great bowl, and he could not expect to see how far the forest lasted. Still, he did not see this, and he climbed down full of despair. He got to the bottom again, scratched, hot, and miserable, and could not see anything in the gloom below when he got there. His report soon made the others as miserable as he was. The force goes on forever and ever and ever in all directions. What shall we do? What is the use of sending a hobbit? They cried, as if it was his fault. They did not care tuppence about the butterflies, and were only made more angry when he told them about the beautiful breeze, which they were too heavy to climb up and feel. That night, they ate the very last scraps and crumbs of food. The next morning, when they woke, the first thing they noticed was that they were gnawingly hungry. And the next thing was that it was raining, and that here and there, the drip of it dropping heavily to the forest floor. That only reminded them that they were also parchingly thirsty without doing anything to relieve them. You cannot quench terrible thirst by standing under giant oaks and waiting for a chance drip to fall on your tongue. The only scrap of comfort that there came was unexpectedly from Bombor. He woke up suddenly and sat up, scratching his head. He could not make out where he was, nor why he felt so hungry, for he had forgotten everything that had happened since they started their journey that May long ago. The last thing he remembered was a party at the Hobbit's house, and they had great difficulty in making him believe the tale as many of all the many adventures they'd had since. When he heard there was nothing to eat, he sat down and wept, for he felt very weak and wobbly on his legs. Why did I ever wake up? He cried. I was having such beautiful dreams. I dreamt I was walking in a forest rather like this one, only lit with torches on the trees and lamps swinging from the branches and fires burning on the ground. And there was a great feast going on for ever and ever. A woodland king was there with a crown of leaves, and there was a merry singing, and I could not count or describe the things that there were to eat and drink. You need not try, said Thorn. In fact, if you can't talk about something else, you'd better be silent. We are quite annoyed enough with you as it is. If you hadn't waked up, we should have left you to your idiotic dreams in the forest. You are no joke to carry after weeks short commons. There was nothing now to be done but to tighten the belts around the empty stomachs and hoist the empty sacks on their sacks and packs and trudge along the track without any great hope of ever getting to the end before they lay down and died of starvation. This they did all that day, going very slowly and wearily, while Bombor kept wailing that his legs would not carry him and that he wanted to lie down and sleep. No, you don't, they said. Let your legs take some of the share. We've carried you far enough. All the same, he suddenly refused to step further and flung himself on the ground. Go on, if you must, he said. I'm just going to lie here and sleep and dream of food. If I can't get it any other way, I hope I never wake up again. That moment, Balin, who was a little way ahead, called out, What's that? I thought I saw a twink of light in the forest. They all looked, and the longish way off, it seemed as if they saw a red twinkle in the dark. Then another, and then another sprang up out beside it. Even Bombor got up, and they hurried along then, not caring if it was trolls or goblins. The light was in front of them and to the left of the path. When at last they had drawn level to it, it seemed plain that torches and fires were burning in the trees, but it was a good way off the track. Looks as if my dreams were coming true, gasped Bombor, puffing up behind. He wanted to rush off into the woods after the lights, but the others remembered only too well the warnings of the wizard and Born. A feast would be no good if we never got back alive from it, said Thorn. But without a feast, we shan't remain alive much longer anyway, said Bombor, and Bilbo heartily agreed with him. They argued about it backwards and forwards for a long while, until they agreed at length to send a couple of spies to creep in near the lights and find out more about them. But then they could not agree on who was to be sent. Nobody seemed anxious to run the chance of getting lost and never finding his friends again. In the end, in spite of the warnings Hunger described him, because Bombor kept describing all the good things that were being eaten according to his dream in the woodland feast, so they all left the path and plunged into the forest together. After a good deal of creeping and crawling, they peered around the trunks and looked into the clearing where some elves had been, uh, where some trees had been felled and the ground leveled. There were many people there, elvish looking folk, all dressed in green and brown and sitting on sawn rings of the felled trees in a great circle. There was a fire in the midst, and there were torches fastened to some of the trees about. But the most splendid sight of all, they were eating and drinking and laughing merrily. The smell of roast meats was so enchanting that, without waiting to consult one another, every one of them got up and scrambled forwards into the ring with the idea of begging for some food. No sooner had the first of them stepped into the clearing than all the lights went out as if by magic. Someone kicked the fire, and it went up in the rockets of glittering sparks and vanished. They were lost in a completely lightless dark, as they could not find one another, not for a long time at any rate. After bumbling frantically in the gloom and falling over logs and bumping crash into trees and shouting and calling till they must have waked everything in the forest for miles, at last they managed to gather themselves in a bundle and count themselves by touch. By the time they had, of course, quite forgotten in what direction the path they had forgotten in what direction the path lay, and were all hopelessly lost, at least until morning. There was nothing for it but to settle down for the night where they were, and they dare not to search on the ground for scraps of food for fear of becoming separated again. But they had but they had not been lying long, and Bilbo was only just getting drowsy when Dory, whose turn it was to watch first, said in a loud whisper, "The lights are coming out again over there, and there are more of them than ever." Up they jumped, and sure enough, not far away were scores of twinkling lights, and they heard the voices and the laughter quite plainly. They crept slowly forwards in a single line, each touching the back of the one in front. When they got near, Thorin said, "No rushing forward this time. No one stir from hiding till I say. I shall send Mr. Baggins alone first to talk to them. They won't be frightened of him." What about me of them, thought Bilbo. And anyway, I hope they won't do anything nasty to him. When they had got to the edge of the circle of lights, they pushed Bilbo suddenly from behind. Before he had time to slip on his ring, he stumbled forward into the full blaze of the fire and torches. It was no good. Out went the lights again, and complete darkness fell. It had been if it had been difficult collecting themselves before, it was far worse this time, and they simply could not find the hobbit. Every time they counted themselves, it only made 13, and they shouted and called after Bilbo Baggins, "Hobbit, you dratted hobbit! Hi, hobbit, confiscate you! Where are you?" And other things of that sort, but there was no answer. They were just about to give up when Dory stumbled across him by sheer luck. In the dark, he fell over what he thought was a log and found it was the hobbit curled up fast asleep. It took a deal of shaking to wake him, and when he was awake, he was not pleased at all. "I was having such a lovely dream," he grumbled, "all about having the most gorgeous dinner." "Good heavens, he's gone off like Bombor," they said. "Don't tell us about your dreams. Dream dinners aren't any good, and we can't share them. They're the best I'm likely to get in this beastly place," he muttered as he lay down beside the dwarfs and tried to get back to sleep and find his dream again. But this was not the last of the lights in the forest. Later, when the night must have been getting old, Killy, who was watching then, came and roused them again, saying, "There's a regular blaze of lights begun not far away. Hundreds of torches and many fires must have been lit suddenly and by magic. And hark, the singing and harps!" After lying and listening for a while, they found they could not resist the desire to go nearer and try once more to get help. Up they got again, and this time the results were disastrous. The feast that they saw now was greater and more magnificent than before. And at the head of the long line of feasters sat a woodland king with a crown of leaves on his golden hair, very much as Bombor had described the figure in the dream. The elvish folk were passing bowls from hand to hand across the fires, and some were harping, and many were singing. Their gleaming hair was twined with flowers. Green and white gems glinted in their collars and their belts, and their faces and their songs were filled with mirth. Loud and clear and fair were those songs, and out stepped Thorin into their midst. Dead silence fell in the middle of the world of the word. Fell in the middle of a word. Out went all the lights. The fires leapt up in black smoke. Ashes and cinders were in the eyes of the dwarves, and the wood was again filled with their clamor and their cries. Bilbo found himself running around and around, as he thought, and calling, Dory, Nori, Ori, Ori, Oin, Gloin, Philly, Killy, Bombor, Biffor, Bofor, Dwalin, Balin, Thorn, Oak, and Shield, while people he could not see or feel were doing the same all around him, with the occasional Bilbo thrown in. But the cries of the others got steadily further and fainter, and though after a while it seemed to him that they changed into yells and cries for help in the far distance, all noise at last died right away, and he was left alone in complete silence and darkness. That was one of his most miserable moments. But he soon made up his mind that it was no good trying to do anything till day came out with some little light, and quite useless to go blundering about, tiring himself out with no hope of breakfast to revive him. So he sat himself with his back to a tree, and not for the last time fell to thinking of his far distant hobbit hole with its beautiful pantries. He was deep in thoughts of bacon and eggs and toast and butter when he felt something touch him. Something like a strong, sticky string was against his left hand. When he tried to move, he found his legs were already wrapped with the same stuff. So when he got up, he fell over. Then the great spider, who had been busy tying him up while he dozed, came from behind him and came at him. He could only see the thing's eyes, but he could feel the hairy legs as it struggled to wind its abominable threads around and around him. He was lucky that he had come to his senses in time. Soon he would not have been able to move at all. As it was, he had a desperate fight before he got free. He managed to beat the creature off with his hands. It was trying to poison him to keep him quiet, as small spiders do flies, till he remembered his sword and drew it out. Then the spider jumped back, and he had time to cut his legs loose. After that, it was his turn to attack. The spider evidently was not used to things that carried such stings at their sides, or it would have hurried away quicker. Bilbo came at it before it could disappear and struck with his sword right in the eyes. Then it went mad and leapt and danced and flung out its legs in horrible jerks until he killed it with another stroke. Then he fell down and remembered nothing for a long while. There was the usual dim gray light of the forest day about him when he came to his senses. The spider lay dead beside him, and his sword blade was stained black. Somehow the killing of the giant spider, all alone by himself in the dark, without the help of the wizards or the dwarves or of anyone else, made a great difference to Mr. Baggins. He felt a different person, and much fiercer and bolder in spite of his empty stomach. As he wiped his sword on the grass and put it in its sheath, I will give you a name, he said, and I shall call you Sting. After that, he set out to explore. The forest was grim and silent, but obviously he had first of all to look for his friends, who were not likely to be very far off, unless they had been made prisoners by the elves or worse things. Bilbo felt that it was unsafe to shout, and he stood a long while wondering in what direction the path lay and in what direction he should go first to look for the dwarves. Oh, why did we not remember Baron's advice and Gandalf's, he lamented. What a mess we are in now. I only wish it was we. It's so horrible being all alone. In the end, he made as good a guess as he could at the right direction, from which the cries for help had come last night, and by luck, he was born with a good share of it. He guessed more or less right, as you will see. Having made up his mind, he crept along as cleverly as he could. Hobbits are clever at quietness, and especially in the woods, as I've already told you, and Bilbo had slipped on his ring right before he started. That is why the spiders neither saw nor heard him coming. He had picked his way stealthily for some distance when he noticed a place of dense black shadow ahead of him, black even for that forest, like a patch of midnight that had been cleared away. As he drew nearer, he saw that it was made by spider webs, one behind and over and tangled with another. Suddenly he saw, too, that there were spiders, huge, horrible, sitting in the branches above him, and ring or no ring, he trembled with fear lest they should discover him. Standing behind a tree, he watched the silence and stillness of the woods. He realized that these loathsome creatures were speaking to one another. Their voices were sort of thin creaking and hissing, but he could make out the words that they said. They were talking about the dwarves. "It's a nasty struggle, but worth it," said one. "What nasty thick skins they have, to be sure, but I'll wager there's good juice inside." "Aye, they'll make fine eating when they've hung a bit," said another. "Don't hang 'em too long," said a third. "They're not as fat as they might be. Been feeding none too well of late, I would guess." "Kill 'em, I say," hissed the fourth. "Kill 'em now and hang 'em dead for a while." "They're dead now, I'll warrant," said the first. "That they are not. I saw one struggling just now, just coming around again. I should say after a beautiful sleep. I'll show you." And with that, one of the fat spiders ran along a rope till it came to a dozen bundles hanging in a row from a high branch. Bilbo was horrified now that he noticed for the first time, dangling in the shadows, to see a dwarfish foot sticking out of the bottom of some of the bundles, or here and there the tip of a nose, or the bit of beard or hood. To the fattest of these bundles the spider went. "This poor Bombor, I'll bet," thought Bilbo, and nipped hard at the nose that stuck out. There was a muffled yelp inside, and a toe shot up and kicked the spider straight and hard. There was life in Bombor still. There was a noise like a kicking a flabby football, and the enraged spider fell off the branch, only catching itself with its own thread just in time. The others laughed. "You were quite right," they said. "The meat's alive and kicking." "I'll soon put an end to that," hissed the angry spider, climbing back onto the branch. Bilbo saw that the moment had come when he must do something. He could not get up with the brutes, so he had nothing, and he had nothing to shoot with. But he looked around. He saw in this place there were many stones lying in what appeared to now be a little watercourse. Bilbo was a pretty fair shot with the stone, and it did not take him long to find a nice, egg-smooth shaped one that had fitted his hand cozily. As a boy, he used to practice throwing things until rabbits, squirrels, and even birds got out of his way, quick as lightning, when I saw him stoop. And even grown-ups had still spent a great deal of time at, and even as a grown-up, he had spent a great deal of time at quillets, dart throwing, shooting the wands, bowling, ninepins, and other quiet games of aiming and throwing sort. Indeed, he could do a lot of things besides blowing smoke rings, asking riddles, and cooking that I haven't told you about. There is no time now. While he was picking up the stones, the spider reached Bombor, and soon he would have been dead. At that moment, Bilbo threw. The stone struck the spider plunk in the head, and it dropped senseless off the tree, flopped to the ground, where all its legs curled up. The next stone went whizzing through a big web, snapping its cord and taking off the spider sitting in the middle of it. Whack! Dead. After that, there was a deal of commotion in the spider colony, and they forgot the dwarves for a bit, I can tell you. They could not see Bilbo, but they could make a good guess at what direction the stones were coming. As quick as lightning, they came running and swinging towards the hobbit, flinging their long threads in a direction till the air seemed full of waving snares. Bilbo, however, soon slipped away to a different place. The idea came to him to lead the furious spiders further and further away from the dwarves, if he could, to make them curious, excited, and angry all at once. When about 50 had gone off to the place where he stood before, he threw some more stones at these and amongst the others that had stopped behind. Then, dancing among the trees, he began to sing a song to infuriate them and to bring them all after him, and also to let the dwarves hear his voice. And this is what he sang. One sec. "Old fat spider spinning in a tree, old fat spider can't see me. Atticop, won't you stop? Stop your spinning and look for me. Old Tom Noddy, all big body, old Tom Noddy can't spy me. Attercop, down you drop. You'll never catch me up in your tree." Not very good, perhaps, but you must remember he had made it up himself on the spur of a very awkward moment. It did what he wanted it to. As he sang, he threw some more stones and stamped, and practically all the spiders in the place came after him, some dropping on the ground, others racing along the branches, swinging from tree to tree, or casting new ropes across the dark spaces. They made for his noise far quicker than he had expected. They were frightfully angry. Quite apart from the stones, no spider ever likes being called Attercop, and Tom Nobby, of course, is insulting to anybody. Off Bilbo scuttled to a fresh place, but several of the spiders had run now to different points of the glade where they lived, and they were busy spinning webs across all the spaces between the tree stems. Very soon, the hobbit would be caught in a thick fence all around him. At least that was the spider's idea. Standing now in the middle of the hunting and spinning insects, Bilbo plucked up his courage and began to sing a new song. Lazy lob and crazy cob are weaving webs to wind me. I am far more sweet than other meat, but still they cannot find me. Here I am, naughty little fly. You are lazy, fat and lazy. You cannot trap me, though you try, and your cobwebs crazy. With that, he turned and found the last space between the two tall trees had been closed with a web. But luckily not a proper web, only great strands of double-thick spider rope run hastily backwards and forwards from the trunk to the trunk. Out came the little sword, and he slashed the threads of the pieces and went off singing. The spiders saw the sword, although I don't suppose they knew what it was, and once the whole lot of them came hurrying after the hobbit, all along the ground and the branches, hairy legs waving, nippers and spinners snapping, eyes popping, full of froth and rage. They followed him into the forest until Bilbo had gone as far as he dared. Then, quieter than a mouse, he stole back. He had precious little time, he knew, before the spiders were disgusted and came back to their trees where the dwarves hung. In the meanwhile, he had to rescue them. The worst part of the job was getting them on the long branch where the bundles were was getting up on the long branch where the bundles were dangling. I don't suppose he would have managed it if the spiders had not luckily left a rope hanging down. With its help, though it stuck to his hand and hurt him, he scrambled up, only to meet an old, slow, wicked, fat-bodied spider who had remained behind to guard the prisoners, and had been busy pinching them to see which was the juiciest to eat. Had thought of starting the feast while the others were away, but Mr. Baggins was in a hurry, and before the spider knew anything that was happening, it felt sting and rolled off the branch dead. Bilbo's next job was to cut loose a dwarf. What was he to do? If he cut the string which hung him up, the wretched dwarf would tumble thump to the ground a good way below. Wriggling along the branch, which made all poor dwarves dance and dangle like ripe fruit, he reached the first bundle. Philly or Killy, he thought by the tip of the blue hood sticking on the top. Most likely Philly, he thought by the tips of the long nose poking out the winding threads. He managed by leaning over to cut most of the sticky strands and bound himself around, and then, sure enough, with a kick and a struggle, most of Philly emerged. I'm afraid Bilbo actually laughed at the sight of him jerking his stiff arms and legs like dancing on the spider strings under his armpits, just like one of those funny toys bobbing on a wire. Somehow or other, Philly got onto the branch, and when he did his best to help the hobbit, although he was feeling very sick and ill from spider poison, and from hanging most of the night, and the next day wound round and round with only his nose to breathe through. Took him ages to get the beastly stuff out of his eyes and eyebrows. As for his beard, he had to cut off most of it. Well, between them, they started to haul up one dwarf and then another and slash them free. None of them were better off than Philly, and of them were worse. Hardly any had been able to breathe. Some had been hardly able to breathe at all. Long noses are sometimes useful, you see. And some had been more poisoned. In this way, they rescued Killy before Dory Nori, poor old Bombor, was so exhausted he was the fattest, had been constantly pinched and poked, that he just rolled off the branch and fell plop on the ground, fortunately on some leaves, and lay there. But there were still 5 dwarves hanging on the end of the branches when the spiders came back more full of rage than ever. Bilbo immediately went on to the end of the branch nearest the tree trunk and kept back those that crawled up. He had taken off his ring when he had rescued Philly and forgotten to put it on again, so now they began to splutter and hiss. Now we see you, you nasty little creature. We will eat you and leave your bones and skin hanging in a tree. Ugh, it's got a sting, has he? Well, we'll get him all the same, and then we'll hang him head downwards for a day or two. While this was going on, the other dwarves were working at the rest of their captives and cutting the threads with their knives. Soon all would be free, although it was not clear what would happen to them after that. The spiders had caught them pretty easily the night before, but that had been unawares and in the dark. This time, there looked like being a horrible battle. Suddenly, Bilbo noticed that some of the spiders were gathered around old Bombor on the floor and tied him up again and were dragging him away. He gave a shout and slashed at the spiders in front of him. They gave way quickly gave way. He scrambled down the tree right into the middle of those on the ground. His little sword was something new, and in the way of stings for them. How it darted to and fro, it shone with delight as he stabbed at them. Half a dozen were killed before the rest drew off and left Bombor and Bilbo. Come down, he shouted at the dwarves on the branch. Don't stay up there and be netted. For he saw the spiders were swarming all up the neighboring trees and crawling across the boughs above the heads of the dwarves. Down the dwarves scrambled or jumped or dropped, 11 all in a heap, most of them very shaky and little used to their legs. There were at last 12 of them, counting poor Bombor, who was being propped up on the other side by his cousin Bifor and his brother Bofor. And Bilbo was dancing about and waving his sting, and hundreds of angry spiders were gogging at them and all around and about above. It looked pretty hopeless. Then the battle began. Some of the dwarves had knives, some had sticks, and all of them could get at stones, and Bilbo had his elvish dagger. Again and again the spiders were beaten off, and many of them were killed. But it could not go on for long. Bilbo was nearly tired out. Only 4 of the dwarves were able to stand firmly, and soon they would be overpowered like weary flies. Already the spiders were beginning to weave their webs all about them again from tree to tree. In the end, Bilbo could think of no plan except to let the dwarves in on the secret of his ring. He was rather sorry about it, but it could not be helped. I'm going to disappear, he said. I shall draw the spiders off if I can, and you must keep together and make in the opposite direction. Towards the left there, more or less away towards the place where we last saw the elf fires. It was difficult to get them to understand, what with their dizzy heads and shouts and the whacking of sticks and the throwing of stones, but at last Bilbo felt he could delay no longer. The spiders were drawing their circle ever closer. He suddenly slipped on his ring, and to the great astonishment of the dwarves, he vanished. Soon there came the sound of Lazy Lob and Attercob from the trees away to the right. That upset the spiders greatly. They stopped advancing, and some went off in the direction of the voice. Attercob made them so angry that they lost their wits, and Balin, who had grasped Bilbo's plan better than the rest, led the attack. The dwarves huddled together in a knot and sent a shower of stones. They drove at the spiders on the left and burst through the ring. Away behind them now, shouting and singing, and the shouting and singing suddenly stopped. Hoping desperately that Bilbo had not been caught, the dwarves went on. Not fast enough, though. They were sick and weary and could not go much better than a hobble and a wobble. Although many of the spiders were close behind, every now and then they had to turn and fight the creatures that were overtaking them. Already the spiders in the trees above them and were throwing down long, clinging threads. Things were looking pretty bad again when suddenly Bilbo reappeared and charged into the astonished spiders unexpectedly from the side. Go on, he shouted. I will do the stinging. And he did. He darted backwards and forwards, slashing at spider threads, hacking at their legs, and stabbing at their fat bodies if they came too near. The spiders swelled with rage and spluttered and frothed and hissed out their terrible curses, but they had become mortally afraid of Sting and dared not come very near now that it had come back. So curse as they would, their prey moved slowly but steadily away. It was a most terrible business and seemed to take hours. But at last, just when Bilbo felt he could not lift his hand for one single stroke more, the spiders suddenly gave up and followed them no more, but went back disappointed to their dark colony. The dwarves then noticed that they had come to the edge of the ring where the elf fires had been. Whether it was one of those they had seen the night before, they could not tell, but it seemed that some good magic lingered at such spots which the spiders did not like. At any rate, here the light was greener and the boughs less thick and threatening, and they had a chance to rest and draw breath. There they lay for some time, puffing and panting, but very soon they began to ask questions. They had to have the whole vanishing business carefully explained, and the finding of the ring interested them so much that for a while they forgot their own troubles. Balin, in particular, insisted on having the golem story, riddles and all, told all over again with the ring in its proper place. But after a time, the light began to fail, and other questions were soon asked. Where were they? Where was their path? And where was there any food? And what were they going to do next? These questions they asked over and over again, and it was from little Bilbo that they seemed to expect the answers. From which you can see that they had changed their opinion of Mr. Baggins very much, and had begun to have a great respect for him, as Gandalf had said they would. Indeed, they really expected him to think of some wonderful plan for helping them and were not merely grumbling. They knew too well that they would soon all have been dead if it had not been for the hobbit, and they thanked him many times. Some of them even got up and bowed right on the ground before him, though they fell over with the effort and could not get to their legs again for some time. Knowing the truth about the vanishing did not lessen their opinion of Bilbo at all, for they saw he had wits as well as luck and a magic ring, and all three are very useful possessions. In fact, they praised him so much that Bilbo began to feel that he really was something of a bold adventurer about himself, after all, although they would have felt a lot bolder still if they'd had something to eat. But there was nothing at all, and none of them were fit to go looking for anything or to search for the lost path. Lost path. No other idea could come to Bilbo's tired head. He just sat staring in front of him at the endless trees, and after a while, all fell silent again, all except Balin. Long after the others had stopped talking and shut their eyes and kept muttering and chuckling to himself. He kept on muttering and chuckling to himself. Golem. Oh, I'm blessed. That's how you sneak past me, is it? Now I know. I just crept along quietly. Did you, Mr. Baggins? Buttons all over the doorstep. Good old Bilbo, 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 Bo, Bo, Bo. Then he fell asleep, and there was complete silence for a while. All at once, all of a sudden, Dwalin opened his eye and looked around. "Where's Thorin?" he asked. It was a terrible shock. Of course, there were only 13 of them, 12 dwarves and a hobbit. Where indeed was Thorin? They wondered what evil fate had befallen him, magic or dark monsters, and they shuddered as they lay lost in the forest. There they dropped off one by one into an uncomfortable sleep, full of horrible dreams, as the evening wore to black night. And there we must leave them for the present, too sick and weary to set guards or take turns watching. Thorin had been caught much faster than they had. You remember Bilbo falling like a log into sleep when he had stepped into the circle of light? The next time it had been Thorin who had stepped forward, and as the lights went out, he fell like a stone enchanted. All the noise and the dwarves lost in the night, their cries as the spiders caught them and bound them, and all the sounds of the battle the next day had passed over him unheard. Then the wood elves had come to him and bound him and carried them away. The feasting people were wood elves, of course. These are not wicked folk. If they had a fault, is to distrust strangers. Although their magic was strong, even in those days, they were wary. They differed from the high elves of the west and were more dangerous and less wise. For most of them, altogether with their scattered relations in the hills and mountains, were descended from the ancient tribes that never went to the ferry in the west. There the light elves and the deep elves and the sea elves went and lived for ages and grew fairer and wiser and more learned, and invented their magic and their cunning craft in making beautiful and marvelous things before some came back into the wide world. In the wide world, the wood elves lingered in the twilight of our sun and moon, but loved best the stars. And they wandered in their great forests that grew tall by the lands that were now lost, and they dwelt most often on the edges of the woods, from which they could escape at times to hunt or to ride and run over the open lands by moonlight or starlight. And after the coming of men, they took ever more and more to the glooming and the dusk. Still elves they were, and remain, that is, a good people. In the great cave some miles within the edge of the Mirkwood and its eastern side, there lived at this time their greatest king. Before his huge doors of stone a river ran out of the heights of the forest and flowed on out the marches to the feet of the wooded lands. This great cave, from which countless smaller ones opened out on every side, wound far underground and had many passages and wide halls, but it was lighter and more wholesome than any goblin dwelling, and neither so deep nor so dangerous. In fact, the subjects of the king mostly lived and hunted in the open woods, and had houses and huts on the ground in the branches. The beeches were their favorite trees, and the king's cave was his palace, and the strong palace of his treasures, and the fortress of his people against their enemies. It was also the dungeon of his prisoners, so to the cave they dragged Thorin, not too gently, for they did not love dwarves and thought he was an enemy. in the ancient days, they had had wars with the dwarves, whom they had accused of stealing their treasure. It is only fair to say that the dwarves gave a different account and said that they only took what was their due, for the Elf King had bargained with them to shape his raw gold and silver, and afterwards had refused to give them their pay. The Elf King, if the Elf King had a weakness, it was for treasure, especially silver and white gems. And though his hoard was rich, he was ever eager for more, since he had not yet as great a treasure as the other elf lords of old. His people neither mined nor worked metals or jewels, nor did they bother much with trade or with tilling of the earth. All this was well known to every dwarf, although Thorin's family had nothing to do with the old quarrel I've spoken with. Consequently, Thorin was angry at their treatment of him when they took the spell off of him and he came to his senses, and also he was determined that no word of gold or jewels would be dragged out of him. The king looked sternly at Thorin when he was brought before him and asked him many questions, but Thorin would only say that he was starving. "Why did you and your folk 3 times try to attack my people at their merrymaking?" asked the king. "We did not attack them," asked Thorin. "We came to beg because we were starving." "Where are your friends now, and what are they doing?" "Don't know, but I expect starving in the forest." "What are you doing in the forest?" "Looking for food because we were starving." "But what brought you to the forest at all?" asked the king angrily. At that, Thorin shut his mouth and would not say another word. "Very well," said the king. "Take him away and keep him safe until he feels inclined to tell the truth, even if he wastes 100 years. Then the elves put thongs on him and shut him in one of the inmost caves with strong wooden doors and left him. They gave him food and drink, plenty of both, if not refined, for wood elves are not goblins, and were reasonably well behaved to their worst enemies when they captured them. The giant spiders are the only living things they had no mercy upon. There in the king's dungeon poor Thorin lay, and after he had gotten over his thankfulness for bread and meat and water, he began to wonder what had become of his unfortunate friends. It was not very long before he discovered, but that belongs in the next chapter and the beginning of another adventure, which the Hobbit again showed his usefulness. There it was. Chapter 8. The infamous spiders. Chapter 9, I believe we shall do. Let's see, how long have we been going now? I believe it has been quite some time. Yeah, an hour. It's been an hour, a solid hour. In the interest of not ruining my voice, I am going to call the reading here. We're on chapter 9. We're actually making decent progress. I mean, there's still plenty to go, but we're making some decent progress, which is awesome. I mean, that's the point. There's no rush here. We're just trying to get through the Hobbit and enjoy ourselves on the way through. And so that is what we're doing. Thinking on my plans. I believe what I will do is I'm going to end this stream, grab some dinner, and then maybe I'll come back and play some games. I think that sounds like a good idea. So, if you would like to, feel free to come back and enjoy some gaming later on this evening. Not for too long. I have to, do stuff in the morning and can't play forever. But it would be nice to get a little break and play some games, I think. So we will do that. But I am in desperate need of some food. As desperate as the Hobbit. That's perhaps some exaggeration. But so I will leave you here for right now. As I said, I will be back later. But yeah. Thank you for joining me for chapter 8 of The Hobbit. Next time. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I do have to figure a better schedule. This is okay for this one. I want to have essentially 2 mornings and 1 afternoon, or 1 evening. 2 mornings and 1 evening schedule, because I also don't want to do Friday evening, because it overlaps with things. So, we'll do Friday evening this week, but I'll try and figure out a better schedule. I want to be able to be streaming when there's time for other people to show up as well. So, but at any rate, um, let's see. Oh, you might be amused to see. Oh, I can't actually do it on here. Hold on. Well, I think I can do it on here. Yes. So you might be amused to find that you are able to use this emote. So if you go click on the small face at the bottom and you look under Baron the Regal Beagle, you will find this emote that I have made, or I have had made for the stream, which I think will come in more handy when we're doing more math one time. I can put a few more emotes in now that I've gotten affiliate, whatever it's called. So look for a couple more to be showing up, but I thought this was funny. Anyway, I apologize for that. I'm gonna go get dinner. I'm gonna cut this here. I will see you guys later. Feel free to join back tonight or not. Not a problem. I'm just gonna play some games, and anyone who wants to join may, of course, join. Otherwise, have a wonderful evening. And oh, hey, Mark. I'm glad to see you here. Um, yeah, like I said, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm doing my best to do reading. Next week, I think I'll do some more short stories again. Uh, so I got to figure stuff out. Anyway, um, brain, right. So yes, going to get food, then gonna come back and play some more. Again, thank you so much to everyone who showed up and enjoyed my off kilter reading of of The Hobbit as we keep going through. Thank you very much, and I will see you guys later on tonight. Goodbye.